Welcome to my podcast, Esteemed Women. It used to be called Silence and then became Innovation. And finally, women are now more empowered than ever to use their voices to express what it's really like to strive and thrive in what often tends to feel like a man's world. I'm sure it hasn't been easy, but these women have really achieved and accomplished. They're truly esteemed women who have chosen careers in science, technology and innovation. They're typically go-getters, alpha females, hardworking and maybe even a little bit perfectionistic, but on the whole they've really applied their talents and skills to make a difference. That was certainly my own intention when working as a mechanical engineer and fluid dynamicist. In these episodes you'll get a chance to hear about some fascinating innovations, but you're also more likely to be inspired and uplifted by the personal stories and experiences of my amazing guests. So let's hear it from my STEM sister, an incredibly esteemed woman, Sarah Chapman, an applications engineering technical manager and chemist.
My name's Sarah Chapman. I am a super passionate STEM ambassador. My day job is currently an application engineering technical manager. We can chat a bit more about what that involves. But yeah, I've always kind of worked in technical, but in loads of different jobs. And I'm really, really passionate about encouraging diversity in STEM, so science, technology, engineering and maths, which I'm sure your viewers know.
Yeah, like I would like to delve into what you do. So why don't you give us a quick sweep of like what your job entails?
Yeah, so my job right now is really fun. So if you have been on a plane or a train or been in a car, most likely within that vehicle, there will be loads of adhesives and tapes. So my company make industrial tapes and adhesives amongst many, many other products. But my current job is I've got a team of engineers and they work with customers who make trains and planes and cars. And they try and figure out which tapes to use. And it's really interesting. I certainly, until I did this role, I just had no idea how much usage there is of tapes and adhesives. You kind of think of vehicles and you think that they're going to be screwed together or welded. And actually there's such an advantage in using tapes and adhesives because it's lightweight and you can resist fatigue and you can seal as well as bond. So yeah, it's a fascinating job and it's not my specialist subject. I'm in this capacity, I'm a manager of the engineers, but so they're always teaching me and they're the experts, but it's really interesting and yeah, it's a fascinating area. So yeah, it's good.
That sounds like really it's one of those areas of engineering that you don't think about, you kind of take for granted.
It's quite hidden really, and you actually, in actual fact, if you've got a good specification, if things will deliberately be hidden. So you know, when let's say you're bonding the lap trays that come down in trains or planes or something, you know, that there'll probably be some kind of thin bonding tape that sticks that stuff together. And actually when it's working well, you won't notice it, you won't see it. And I think there's a lot of science like that. So I'm a chemist originally by background, and it's literally science is all around us. You know, it's the same for engineering. You know, pick up any product and there will probably be, you know, hundreds of scientific applications. All of those will have engineers behind them. They'll have manufacturing technologists. You know, there's so many kind of STEM jobs that we just don't realize. So yeah, I'm kind of fascinated in that regard. And I've had the real privilege to kind of work in loads of different areas like that. So now I'm in tapes and adhesives, but in the past I've worked for safety products and that kind of thing. And again, there's just so much science and technology that goes behind it. And that's what fascinates me. And that's what I think people don't realize.
Has there been one thing in tapes and adhesives where you've gone, hold on a minute, that just completely turns everything I've ever known on its head?
Oh, it's such a good question. I think and this probably wouldn't surprise what I'd call a real engineer. You know, I sometimes think I'm like an honorary engineer. My job is engineering manager, but I'm not a qualified engineer. So, but for me, it's still just mind blowing when you look at this tiny, very lightweight piece of tape. I'll give you an example. So we tested our tapes with the tug of war team. So if you imagine that, you know, two teams, you know, like 10 or so big, strong people pulling in different directions, a little bit of tape in the middle, just holding these ropes together. And they pulled and they pulled and they pulled and they pulled, and the tape flexes and stretches, but it didn't break. And I still, that I still can't quite get my head around. I still find it amazing. The challenge with that is that it's got to be correctly applied. So there is quite a lot of science in how we do that. And that's why the engineering function is really important, because you can't just go, okay, I want to bond something together, I'm just going to pick that tape and I'll stick it together. You've got to prepare the surface, you've got to understand all the forces, you've got to make sure you select the right tape or the right adhesive. So really understanding that. So that's interesting because it's multidisciplinary. So it's a bit of chemistry, it's a bit of engineering, it's a bit of physics. So yeah, it's a really it's the kind of area I never thought I would say I was fascinated by, if I'm totally honest.
And engineering has quite a massive PR problem.
Yeah.
And you're in an interesting place in the sense that you've come from a STEM background and now you're managing engineers. Mm-hmm. What to you is an engineer, given your experiences now? Yeah,
and it's obviously one of those questions that has multiple answers, right? So I'm in awe of the engineers that I work with. Most of them are actually, not all of them. Some of them have a science background, but then they've got engineering qualifications in their specialized field. Some of them have engineering backgrounds as well. So I guess, arguably you would say it's somebody with a degree in engineering or a diploma in engineering or something like that. But if you ask me what does an engineer do, I would say they solve problems. And in that regard, everybody can be an engineer. And a lot of what I do is engineering. So yeah, it's interesting because I think we need to kind of broaden that definition. And I think we need people to understand that engineering isn't the stereotypes that you think of, and I know you're passionate about this. This is like, and I still have it. I work with engineers who don't fit the stereotype at all. And yet, if I think of engineering, probably if my instinct, if you ask me to imagine an engineer, is still overalls and maybe a hard hat. and that's crazy because I know better. I've worked with engineers from all different disciplines and in sort of all different guises, and yet I still have that bias. I have that stereotype going on. So if I've got that, then how prevalent is that in society in general, and how many people does it put off because they don't see themselves in that? In actual fact, engineering it's solving problems, and it's everything from, software engineering is completely different to civil engineering, although arguably there's more and more overlaps with this digital and some of the more traditional skills, but it's just so varied. And I kind of want to share that with people because I figure like you're really missing out. If you don't know that, you're really missing out on all these potentially fascinating jobs in areas of interest. So I always say this about STEM. I think whatever your passion, whatever your interest, I would bet you that there is a STEM job that you could do that would enable you to follow that passion. So it might not be what you think of, but so, let's take an example. If you really, really enjoy music, maybe you're not going to be a rock star and go around the world being on stage, but you could be behind stage doing the lighting or setting up the stage or whatever. There's all these kind of STEM jobs that actually enable you to follow interests. So I think when we think of engineering, we really have to think of it in those terms and say, actually, where is engineering used? And if you look around, it's literally everywhere.
I love that answer or that example because I think even if you were to defy the stereotypes, engineering and STEM kind of related jobs are still off-putting because it feels like it's a lot of hard work.
Yes, yeah. They're seen as difficult subjects, aren't they? People think, all engineers are like super clever, they're super good at maths, and obviously there are, in any discipline, there's people who are very academic and there's people who are very geeky. But actually, I think to be good at problem solving, if you think of it in that term, then actually you need to be creative and you need to be curious and you need to be good at collaboration. You need to be able to work as part of a team. So actually, if you think about it in that sense, I think it opens it up to a lot more people. I think a lot more people would say, oh, actually, I can do that. I can fix stuff. I might do it by asking for help. I might do it by, doing it in a different way or thinking in a different way. But actually, when you think about it as solving problems, I think it becomes a lot more appealing and accessible to people.
Yeah, I think we're very much on the same page. And when I learned about you, it was actually through your TED Talk, which is just so powerful. You know, we were talking about stereotypes and really sort of smashing through them by saying, this is the stereotype for running. This is the stereotype for a scientist. And, I don't want to be any of those stereotypes, but yeah, I love running and love science,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, in that, I give the example of Park Run. So, and that resonates with me because when I was at school, I was the person who was dreading cross country. I'm asthmatic, and so I've always struggled a little bit with things like running. And I absolutely hated it. I was teased, and I just, it was a really big thing for me. Like, oh, we've got cross country today, and I hated it. And it's so funny because, well, it's not funny, it's actually really bad, isn't it? But I then feel like as an adult, I kind of missed out on an opportunity. Running's a brilliant way to keep fit, and it's something you can fit in wherever you are in the world. You can, you don't necessarily even need proper running shoes. You can just do it in trainers. It's a really good way to keep fit. And I sort of then rediscovered it a lot later. And initially I thought about maybe joining a running club. My husband was getting into running, and I was like, maybe I could do that. But then, I saw these really athletic people, and I saw a stereotype that, the sort of triathlete kind of, and I was just like, that's not me. And actually Park Run is completely different. Park Run is made up of, there are those people for sure, but they're really welcoming. They're not going to barge you out of the way. They're really encouraging. And there's also a bunch of people who are jogging and walking, and there's people with dogs, and there's people pushing buggies, and there's people of all shapes and sizes. And it, I kind of went to a Park Run. I was like, okay, this is all right. And I walked the whole first time. It was after my first pregnancy. So I walked the whole time. It took me like 45 minutes to get around the course, but I did it. And then the next week I was like, okay, I'm going to go a bit faster, and I gradually built it up. And so I wouldn't describe myself as a runner, but I do enjoy running. And it's now, I can't actually imagine a week if I didn't go running. It's really good for mental health. So, it's something that because of that complete change, it's the same activity, it's exactly the same activity, but because of that perception and then my own sort of limiting beliefs, it's completely changed. So I think we need to do that with science. I think we need to do that with engineering, because arguably that's more important. If we're missing out on people because they don't feel they can be included, because they don't feel they have value, and the funny thing about Park Run is personal bests are set every week at Park Run. It's not a mediocre kind of, we're just walking or whatever. People might start walking, but then they'll get faster, and maybe they're able to walk 2 laps instead of 1 lap or whatever. So personal bests are still set. It's still a very competitive environment in that regard, but it's just in a friendly, inclusive way where kind of people help each other. So I feel really strongly about that. We've got to do the same thing. We've got to try and do that for science. And actually, and this, you've worked in the STEM industry. People are really willing to support other people. It's actually a very collaborative environment, because that's how you get things done. That's actually the best way to solve problems, is working as a team. So, I think there is this kind of real misperception about the industry, which I hope that if my TEDx talk can change that, then for even just one person, then it was worth going through that that challenge. And it is a challenge to talk for 12 minutes without a script.
Wait, so you must have rehearsed that. It was so
no, I did. I had a script, but I just didn't have it in front of me. But but that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because that's an example of where, public speaking is daunting for most people. And again, I didn't think I could do that. But I kind of found something I was passionate about, and I was like, no, I'm gonna give it a go. And yeah, and I'm really pleased I did, because if a couple of people can see that and think, oh, okay, well, if she's gone into STEM, then maybe I can go into STEM. Maybe there's something there for me. Then that's, I will feel like I've given something back.
Well, what you mentioned now and what came through in your TED talk is this idea of personal best. And I just find that so powerful and kind of woke, because, I think competitiveness can really lead to a lot of misery. It can drive people, which is great, success and achievement just keeps on evolving, but it doesn't necessarily correlate with happiness and feeling fulfilled. And so I love this idea of setting yourself a personal best. And I love this analogy of the running club or the park run, because it is about that. It's, I can picture in my head a park run where, some people kind of just want to meander, just be in a park and be outside and meet up with their friends and have a bit of a social time. Other people are like,
people doing it with a coffee, actually walking with a coffee. Why not?
Why not? You're out, you're about.
It's social. Like say, there's volunteering as well. So people are, there's people volunteering to do the timing, and it's interesting because part of my my TEDx talk was about role models, and it is amazing to have these brilliant role models. It's absolutely amazing to have people who are at the top of their game, and they're people who are like, they're smashing all the, they're the first woman CEO of whatever company. You've got to have that. It's really, really important, because then you can see, you can see a direction. But actually, for people trying to relate to that who are maybe starting their career, it's equivalent to me looking at Usain Bolt and then thinking, well, I can't, I'm not going to even attempt that, because he can run faster than I just than I can drive probably. It's incredible. So it's just too much of a gap. Whereas if I look at somebody, maybe similar to me, who has started off walking and now they're jogging around, that's like, okay, yeah, that's doable, that's achievable. So I think there's something really important about not just showcasing the best, and not just having the people who have broken all the records and are the first and the fastest. You've also got to have people who have, maybe had challenge. I'm not saying that people at the top haven't had challenge, because they normally have, but that's not normally what they're asked about. They're normally asked to talk about their great achievements.
It's not necessarily relatable. And what you're saying there just resonates so deeply with me, and it's probably one of the main reasons why I started this podcast, because there are so many initiatives out there to really support women in STEM and encourage them and put them on a platform, but often these incredible women who have done amazing things just don't feel relatable.
Yes, yeah.
And I've actually had criticism from people saying, oh, you just want to hear about people suffering, and you kind of just want to make it all doom and gloom just so that you feel better about yourself. It is not that. It is not that at all. Someone that's in the park run with a coffee just takes all the intimidation out of things. Like, it just makes you kind of like relax your shoulders and just go, you know what? Like, I'm setting myself a high bar.
Yes.
But there are other people here that don't have such a high bar, and they're out and they're enjoying themselves, and I want what they've got, because they seem content.
And it's about everybody fulfilling their own potential, and whatever success looks like to them. And I think, so another example, I had a technical director once, and he said he told a group about how he suffered from imposter syndrome. It was in a training session. It was there's a scheme called I Am Remarkable from Google, which I would highly recommend, which is all around confidence. So we were in one of these workshops, and he said that, and and it really stuck with me, because I was like, and he was he was in a very senior position on paper. His career was like tick 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 all the way up, and for him to say that he regularly felt that imposter syndrome, that was like, oh, great. It was like just that relief of, oh, okay, that's okay. It's normal and it's okay.
It's not a, oh, great. I'm really glad that you've been suffering.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, you get that too. It just really helps. And also then the inspiration comes when people have overcome those things. So if people can share those things, which is why I like things like the podcast format, because you have time to get into to kind of get beyond the sound bites and the headlines. You can get into the conversation and actually realize that so many people who on paper look like they've had this sort of, perfect career, actually behind the scenes they face loads of the same challenges that a majority of people will be facing, and I think that's really important, and especially for people who are underrepresented, because it means that you can actually think, okay, well, that person was able to overcome that challenge and this is how they did it, this is how they approached it. And I just think it's so important. I think if we only showcase I call them the stars, if you only showcase the stars, then it's fantastic and it's very inspiring, but yeah, it makes it really inaccessible. Whereas if you also show the stories of who I call the streetlights, so they're the people that are just a bit closer to home, who you can relate to, who kind of share the challenges as well as the successes. Those people, they're the ones that actually help you to take the next step. So it's almost like you need both of those things. You need the kind of inspirational light, but you also need the hand holding and somebody to kind of just help you find what's your next step. So yeah, I'm really passionate about the stars and the streetlights and sharing the stories. And I love the podcast format like this because you have all of them, and some of those people are both those things. So it's really important that role models are not just the best or the brightest. It's got to be people that you can relate to. I think that's so important.
You really you solidify all the reasons why I do a podcast like this, because often I do have like a bit of a worry that I don't have like the superstars of STEM, on my podcast, the big names that are going to draw in, and I love chatting to the women that are on my podcast, whether they are, in their early 20s, just kind of figuring out what they're going to do post, undergrad type of thing, or really established kind of more senior women. You're right. It is like a combination of stars and street lamps. And everyone's valid. I think sometimes
exactly all those stories, the person listening, you only need to inspire like one person for that to have been a good use of that format, because you just never know what it is that's going to stick with somebody, I completely agree. Having those stories and also having them in a way where people can actually share, so much of our media is like 20 seconds sort of head, it just, you've got a headline or you've got to do a soundbite, and that's good, and I don't think that we should not do that, but I just think sometimes that deeper conversation is so much more important for people who are actually using those people as role models. So I think it's amazing what you're doing, because it's exactly what we need to do, and also it's showing a face of science and engineering that is probably not what people would expect, and I think that's really crucial. So you mustn't stop.
Well, when you were describing sort of like the stars and the street lamps, I was thinking that we are actually living in a day and an age where people are able to see more street lamps than ever, because generations ago it was all about the sort of the big iconic stars, and like there was a few chosen few who would represent like the talented, the beautiful, this, that, like it was just like it was a triangle
selection.
And today anyone can kind of go viral, essentially.
Exactly. And I think I also believe that anyone can inspire somebody to not necessarily go into a STEM career, but to learn a bit more about STEM, right? So I don't think you need to don't think you even need to understand the science or engineering just to point it out, just to kind of, parents can do it, that, you can be curious about things. That's all STEM really is. It's about curiosity and then studying things and then problem solving. And I think, it's really important that to have that curiosity. And if we kind of make that so that the only people who can do that are the people that who have those kind of select spots, the people who are on telly or who are, have official roles, then the danger is that we just lose the breadth of it. And it means that, it starts reinforcing those stereotypes. So I think it's so important to have a big variety of people, loads of different stories, and everybody's, I think the people I meet who work in STEM, they're all in it for different reasons, and they've all got different things that fascinate them. I was talking about trains. I never thought that would fascinate me. Everybody's got something they just find interesting, and you've got to kind of find that. And I don't think that's going to be the same for all the people. So yeah, I think in a way, social media and things gives us a real opportunity to have more streetlights, to share those stories, and to make sure that women are represented. Because if you look at the history, and if you look at those selected few, often women are missed out. And I think that's really sad, because there are plenty of female role models in the STEM industry, although we're still in a minority. But there's loads of stories out there, and they're fantastic. So I think the more we can share them, whatever format that's in, then the more chance we stand of then finding something that's going to connect with somebody, and then they might just think, oh, okay, that's changed my perception a bit, which can only be a good thing.
I mean, the numbers and statistics are still very low.
Yeah.
And we are in the middle of a transition. I feel that things, I believe, are hopeful, but there's still time required for change. And I wondered, like, being in industry and managing engineers, and there's probably not much gender equality, I'm assuming. Maybe there's a bit more awareness around it, but essentially you're working in mostly male teams or managing.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, I think there's lots of reasons to be hopeful. There's if I need to think of an inspiring female engineer, I have no shortage of names, right? But then that's because I've looked for them. That's because I'm connected to them. That's because I'm here working in STEM. If I think about that from, when I was at school, I wouldn't have a clue. And actually some of the role models that we put into textbooks, they're okay, but they're a bit distant. People like, Marie Skłodowska-Curie, for example, inspirational, definitely story worth reading, right? But, kind of hard to connect with, these sort of historical, Ada Lovelace is another one, fantastic, inspirational.
My book.
Yeah, exactly. And so we need that. We need more. We need to make sure that those real life role models, the people that we can relate to from all different walks of life, that they're showcased. And I think if we, parents can do that. It's not just school. I know that's obviously a big area, and I do a lot with education, but we can do that everywhere. And I think that gradually helps to challenge that sort of thinking that, if I go and work in this environment, I'm not going to see anybody that looks like me. There are people. That said, there still is a lot of underrepresentation. I mean, we're still really under that 20% in most of the engineering and science disciplines. There are exceptions. There are some that have reached parity. Some of the biological fields now, they are beginning to see parity, at least gender parity, although there's still work to do in other areas. But the issue is things like, computer science, physics, engineering, it's still very much underrepresented. So I think that, yes, there's definitely work to do, but I think there's a lot of hope. And I think also the other thing is, in terms of like working conditions, I think probably in a role like mine, I get to see both ends of the spectrum. So a company, the kind of company, I work for a company called 3M, and they've made a public commitment to STEM equity. It's a really big thing for them, because they know that diversity drives innovation. So they've made a commitment. We have schools programs, we have outreach, we have scholarships, we have all sorts of programs to help to improve this. And actually within our company, quite rightly, we are trying really hard to make that an inclusive environment, to make sure that we've got, we don't have gender parity in all the areas, but I work with, I can think of loads of women that I work with in STEM. There's no shortage for me of peers in that regard. But often if I'm going out to maybe a construction site or some manufacturing site, then actually I look at that and I do see the other side of it, which is that still there'll be, no one can tell you where the women's toilet is, and that's still a real challenge, because you are, I'm still regularly the only woman in the room. So that's got to change. Clearly there's still things we need to work on, and I think that's why we need to take those, you're talking about those real role models, and we need to feature them. We need to feature them in books, we need to put them on telly, we need to feature them in social media, we need to tell their stories, because if we don't do that, then people won't know that it's changed, and they won't know that it's changing. So I think there's lots of reasons to hope. That said, we've still got a really, really long way to go.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel that it is particularly bad in the UK. And I don't know what is holding us back, but I'm assuming it's things like tradition and trying to kind of steer the Titanic in terms of like perception and expectation and roles within society. I mean, it's just very, very complex.
Yeah, and it feels like there's so many opportunities for failure, as in if you're, maybe you're at school and you have an interest in a STEM subject, and then there's you've got social aspects at school, you've got the educational aspects, you've got the stories that we teach, you've got the way that we teach these subjects.
It might even be just the problem of using the word STEM.
Yeah, indeed. It's, there's a branding thing there, isn't there? There's all the connotations that come with science and engineering. Then there's right through to access to education. There's big inequalities there. And then when you get actually into employment, you've got issues where if people go into a STEM job, but then like a lot of industries, we lose people. People then they might leave, or we find, especially for women, there is a bit of there's kind of this plateauing where we just don't see people moving into upper management. So it's always like there's so many opportunities to lose people, and I think we need to address all of them, from education right through to employment, because otherwise, if you only address it at one stage, we're not going to be able to kind of sustain that change. So I think there's lots of areas we can carry on working on. Again, there's lots of reasons to hope. The STEM ambassadors program, I think in the UK, is one of the world-class examples of where you've got real people who work in STEM, and they're going into schools or they're hosting visits, and they're really, gradually changing that perception and enhancing that education. So I think there's lots of reasons to be positive, but there's still, so my company conducted a global survey, which is all about the perception of science. And so that found last year, they found that I think it was 7 out of 10 people still felt that a lack of access to STEM education was a barrier. And that's in a country where education is free up until college. So, that's quite worrying that people feel like that. So I think there's the challenges of the reality, but then there's also the challenges of perception. And why people choose different subjects, and then if they perceive they can then get a job in those subjects, that's so important. And I don't think we sell that enough. There's some really fulfilling, lucrative jobs that come from science, technology, engineering, and maths, and I don't think people are aware of them. I think people, when you think of high paid jobs, I don't know what people think of, but I guess things like footballer or pop star. And it's like, actually,
there are professions that are way more popular. And it's kind of a shame, because young people want to be the one that ends up, you know, themselves into that lifestyle. And the likelihood is that it won't be you, you know. It just, it's really, sometimes I do worry what young people are kind of influenced by, because things have become very skewed, especially with media changing and people consuming media in such different ways. And, you know, there are pros and cons. I think we are now more connected than ever to each other. We are also more lonely, because we're kind of putting on a mask of, you know, a filter of our we're documenting our lives through a filter, essentially. It's not realistic, but yet we can be connected more than ever. So it's just it's an interesting time.
Well, that's interesting as well, because that also doesn't help with this. You know, we mentioned earlier that social media, for example, is a way to get more role model stories, you know, more of these streetlights out to people. But also, so the way that social media operates is that it encourages you to put the extremes. And actually, I think what we need is just more people just kind of being average. Exactly. Whereas social media, you know, you kind of can't put, you know, I got a C in my A level or whatever, you know, people want to hear about the A, you know, I know the grading has changed, but you know, the A stars or the failures, and it almost, it makes it very difficult, because we want to use that platform, but then equally you want to use it for good, and you don't want to actually reinforce this kind of brilliance myth, you know, this genius idea. You have to be a genius to work in STEM. You know, I'm not a genius, and I don't think most of the people I work with are. They have expertise because they've worked hard. They've mostly, you know, in most cases they have studied hard and they know their subject, but mostly they're curious, they're collaborative, and they're good communicators. And I think, this kind of myth of you have to be somehow brilliant to be in science, particularly, I think suffers from that. So it's a real challenge, one we've got to, you know, but we're doing some great stuff. You know, I'm doing lots, you're doing lots. There is lots of stuff.
Things are changing.
Yes.
And things are changing, and there's still a lot more to change. And one of those things is allowing women to be multi-dimensional. Now, I consider you to be a woman who's multi-dimensional, because you're leading this engineering team, but you also have a family and all of that, which requires kind of wearing different hats.
Yeah, definitely. But I think it's interesting because it's easiest when you don't have to really wear those different hats, when those things can be integrated. That does help, you know, that does make a difference. And that's why I like, you know, so you know, to take your example, art, you know, the arts and technical, you know, those things, people see them as mutually exclusive, and they're not. And some of the best things, in my opinion, are done because they have both those streams. So I think actually sometimes when you don't have to split things up so much, actually that's, you know, and I think so that, you know, as a working parent, some of that comes down to working for a company where I don't have to hide my you know, and it has, you know, throughout my career there have been times in the past where, you know, I have felt that I couldn't share kind of what was going on in my life because I didn't want to appear unprofessional and things like that. And I think that's massively changed, you know, and the pandemic has helped with that, you know, one of the sort of silver linings in an otherwise fairly dark cloud. But you know, it means that, you know, they have a group in my division, they have a group which is like pets of the division, you know, it's like people are encouraged to share their cats and their dogs and their horses, whatever it is, you know, and things like that have really changed, because it means that, you know, I've got young children, and sometimes work and home, they merge, they blend, and they have to, and that kind of, I think just having permission to do that is fantastic. And it also helps with the role model thing, because it means that, you know, people can see the juggling that goes on, and there is a lot, you know, and sometimes I do it expertly and other times it's a complete mess and it's just chaos, and I think it's good for people to see that you're not kind of some kind of superhuman who's, you know, doing a full-time job, and, you know, I hope I'm being a good mum, you know, although even that comes with its own sort of social perceptions about what that looks like as well. So that's probably a whole nother conversation.
Why does it fall on the shoulders of a woman?
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing that has changed, is more and more, you know, that generally men and fathers say they want to spend more time with their children. So it's kind of a win-win to have more equal partnerships. And I think the fact that families can look different. I think in the past, if your family was anything other than the kind of the sort of traditional nuclear family, then that was a difference that it could be quite difficult to share. And actually now I feel like that's certainly from the kind of business I work in, that's just completely gone. People have got all sorts of home setups and they can share them. And I think that's really important because we talk about working parents, often working mothers for that reason, because historically the kind of a lot of that has fallen to women. But actually, I think it benefits everybody when we can talk about different ways of doing things, and things that, yes, they may benefit working mothers, but actually they're also really good for people with other caring responsibilities, you know. And everybody has stuff in their life that they love, you know, whether it may not be children, but everybody has stuff that they need to integrate with their work. And I think the more kind of open we can be about that, then the better. In my opinion, it helps everybody. So yeah, I feel really grateful to have been part of that change, and I hope that it sticks, and I hope that it continues, because there is still work to do. But yeah, I think that's actually a really positive thing.
Yeah, no, definitely what's happening is positive, because I'm meeting more and more underrepresented people who are just shining and thriving.
Yes, and they're able to do that because they're not always worried about, you know, hiding things. You know, they can actually just bring their full selves. And I think that makes people, you know, people who are happier will perform better. You get better business results, you get more innovation. So it's kind of a no-brainer really, but it took a pandemic to get us to do it.
What are your main focuses? I mean, you've got your job, your position at 3M.
Yeah. So I'm really lucky, and I think it speaks volumes to the kind of company that I work for. But I also have a 20% of my role that is STEM champion for the North Europe region. So I actually officially get to do stuff like this. I get to, you know, I write quite a few articles and things like that. So I get officially to do that, which is brilliant. And that also incorporates any volunteering work. So I've always done volunteering, like STEM volunteering. But now it's like I'm allowed to, I can do it with the backing of the company. So which is really good. And actually they're fairly forward thinking in that regard. I've always been able to have a day off every year to dedicate to the community, and everybody who's employed gets that. And I think I'm seeing that become more common. I'm seeing more companies see volunteering as something, you know, it's the research shows that it's good for employee well-being, it's good for mental health, it's good for productivity. A lot of employees, if they go out and do some volunteering, they come back with more energy and more purpose and more meaning, and it reminds them sometimes why they do the job that they do. So I think it's a fantastic thing to do. It's actually quite cost effective for companies as well. You know, it's not something that they have to put a lot of cost into. So I think that I've really benefited from that. I've been so lucky to be able to be a working parent, a STEM ambassador, a STEM volunteer. I've got this sort of STEM champion role as well, and then I've got my day job. And I've had a lot of different jobs. You know, I'm not a specialist in anything, and I think that's been quite a privilege really as well, because it means you get to see lots of different types of things. And I've done loads of different. They've all been technical, but they've all been different types of roles. So yeah, that's kind of. And if I have any spare time, which to be honest, I tend to do stuff related to STEM, because I'm, you know, you can probably tell I'm pretty passionate about that. But I do have a few hobbies as well. So yeah, when I can.
Is your ultimate goal is your ultimate goal to move the needle?
So yes, but I guess in terms of measuring that's hard, because anecdotally I know that what I do makes a difference, and I'm sure you get the same thing, you know, especially as an author and, you know, being on telly and things. I get a lot of feedback. So to give you an example, there was a student that came in to take part in a STEM competition that we ran. And the teacher said that this particular student was really struggling with focusing, really struggling with the kind of their schoolwork and that kind of thing. They did the competition and it just transformed them. So they worked on a project for a couple of weeks, and it gave them a purpose, and it helped to boost their confidence. And they brought in this project, and it was a scale model of the Tokyo Tower. It was amazing. And they brought it in and we judged it and we gave them some feedback, and it was amazing. And then this particular entry actually ended up in the Japanese embassy in London because they were so impressed with it. Anyway, I got a letter from the teacher months later that said, you know, that whole experience, it wasn't just that they enjoyed the experience and they got something from the experience, it actually changed their trajectory. So they were just, every lesson, they were much more engaged in all the subjects that they were studying. I guess because they had an experience that showed them what they could do. And in this particular case,
it's kind of like acknowledgement for who they are.
Yeah, exactly. And just showing them,
just looking for that.
Exactly, showing them what they could achieve in a relatively short space of time, you know, still while they're children, it raises their aspirations for what they can do longer term. So I kind of get validation from that. I'm like, okay, what, you know, the stuff that I'm doing is helping, it is moving the needle, it is changing careers and you know, in some cases changing lives. But then sometimes when I look at the wider statistics, I do get a bit like, oh, you know, like, you know, it would be nice to just see it creeping up and up and up and up. And actually, you know, it's not that simple. We're seeing it shifting in some areas. And I think that is hard. So I'm interested in your thoughts about that. How do you get that kind of, how do you know that you're doing the right thing and that, you know, we've got to continue doing it?
Well, I've just come back from a trip to the States and basically met a bunch of engineers that are doing very progressive things as a result of a very progressive mentality.
Okay.
And it's really interesting because we talk about like the lack of role models or the kind of the less frequently occurring role models that can break down intimidation and just be accessible and all of that. And when you give those underrepresented individuals an opportunity to have a platform to be seen and heard, it's actually just really simple. Like it's not anything complicated, but for some reason our bias is so deeply rooted in us that we believe that the solution is really complicated, and it's just not. You know, we've been talking for a while on this podcast, and it just seems to me over and over again that the answer is just to give people a little bit of recognition. You know, not in an egotistical point of view, but who doesn't want to feel appreciated, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And just to overcome some of those limiting beliefs that people have, you know, and especially in underrepresented groups, you know, we know that holds underrepresented groups back more. So if you can just, like you say, give people something to kind of go, oh, you know, I did that, I'm proud of that. And, you know, and that really helps with, you know, for example, in some of the sort of STEM competition type things, I think just taking it out of the classroom and just sometimes just teaching it in a different way, that can change. That can be the difference between, oh, I'm not good at maths, I can't do maths, to, oh, I used maths to do something. And then all of a sudden, then you've got that, just it's only a shift, but it's a really important shift. And I think if we can do that, and I know I get feedback that we're doing that. I get feedback, you know, all these things, you know, the books, every time we see somebody on television or social media that is different to the stereotype we expect, that's another little kind of you know, tick that will gradually advance things. I guess my worry is that we're not going fast enough, and that actually we, you know, to reach gender parity, we, you know, I don't even read the estimates, but it's, you know, we've still got a real challenge there. We're still missing out on ideas, we're missing out on talent, we've got a skills gap that we need to fill, and we can't do that unless we engage with underrepresented groups. So I feel there's like an urgency, but I think in terms of what we're actually doing, you're right, it is actually quite simple. You know, the barriers are not actually that complicated. It's
it
about
might be a case,
you know,
it might be a case of phasing out generational mentality, and we may just be at a time where our parents are still kind of influencing the way things are done. I mean, I know that in my at my age, I still make decisions where I'm like, I hope my parents will be cool with that, you know, like it's whereas I think younger generations coming through, they just don't think that way, you know. Everything is about them being individualistic and not necessarily, you know, having to conform to ideals because of cultural background or expectations and things like that. So it's really, really complex. But I think on a really positive note, young people are feeling more comfortable and confident to be themselves.
Yeah, so maybe that actually helps things, doesn't it? Because it's so I was thinking about that, you know, in terms of those stereotypes of, you know, science and engineering, and when I do career talks, I describe myself as a platypus, because you know that lovely story of the platypus that doesn't know which group it belongs to, because it's got a you know, a kind of duckbill beak like a bird, but it's not a bird, and then it can run quite fast on the land, but it's not a land animal, and it can swim really well, but it's not a fish. And I kind of feel the same. I've got a chemistry degree, but I'm not a practicing scientist. I've got an engineering job title, but I'm not an engineer. You know, I'm quite creative, and I do a lot of innovation, but I'm not an inventor. And I've always kind of really struggled to work out, like, what am I? And actually, I think it's taken me quite a long time, and maybe it's changes in society that have helped to just think it's fine to be just who you are. You don't have to have that label. You don't have to have a particular identity. You can have your own identity that's made up of lots of different things. And I think maybe that will help, because if that is more acceptable, then that actually opens up a huge range of STEAM kind of jobs where people are they are multidisciplinary jobs. You know, people talk about the tech sector, but actually the tech sector, you know, technology will be in almost all the jobs in the future, in a positive way, as well as the kind of scary robots are taking our jobs kind of way. Actually, behind every successful machine, there's going to be engineers, there's going to be technicians, there's going to be designers and programmers. You know, there's so many jobs, and I just think that maybe if we can get out of some of those more traditional categories, then maybe we can actually enable people to see how they could fit in, and how their skill sets and their interests could be aligned.
I think we are in the transition period of that as well, because I feel like everything is going digital. And so why would you, I mean, you know, again, when I was stateside and sort of delivering a talk, people came up to me at the end asking me, you know, should I do civil, or, you know, is it
it's like those labels again.
And it's like, do you know what, no one actually really cares whether you did civil or mechanical, or, you know, no one drills into the detail of, like, you know, well, he did industrial, so, like, or she did industrial, so
exactly,
we're not going to take her. First of all, there's such a massive skills gap.
Do engineering, pick something that's even vaguely engineering related. Doesn't matter, does it? You know, I did quite a lot of computing in my chemistry degree. You know, it's a bit random, but I enjoyed it, so I did it. So yeah, absolutely, it's interesting, isn't it, that that's still, for young engineers, that's still sort of seen as a, you know, it's a big decision, isn't it? You know, aero, civil, mechanical, and actually that they're not that, you know, they are different disciplines, but but actually just any of those, if you pick the one you enjoy, because you're going to, with a degree, you're going to do it for 3 years. So, you know, with a PhD, it's even longer. So pick what you enjoy and see where it goes and how you can apply it. So it's interesting. Maybe
that is the advice that now I give, which is like, you know, because I'm not gonna steer someone into industrial design, because so now the advice is do what you enjoy, because you are going to be doing it for a while. And if you're kind of getting up in the morning and thinking, I just don't want to face the day, because you've picked civil when actually you're only interested in like just coding.
Exactly. I mean, and also I think considering other routes, you know, I think there is still a mentality, you know, 3M has been doing some work about skilled trades and the public's perception of skilled trades, and how people respect skilled trades, but then they report that they wouldn't want their children to go and do them, you know. So there's clearly an image problem. And actually, if you think about it, you know, how many of the jobs in the future that are going to be created are going to be those sort of skilled technical trades. So actually thinking, you know, if the university route is, if it appeals, great, go down it. But if it doesn't appeal, or if you're not sure, you know, pick a shorter course, try something else, do a diploma, do an apprenticeship, do something a bit different, and then you can always bolt things on. And I think that's the way that maybe there is a generational shift there that we need to start thinking about.
There's too much pressure on young people, and I think this will always be the case with younger people, is that there will always be this pressure to like make the best decision of your life at the age of like 17 that's going to affect your entire career, you know,
when you've got so much else going on. The
amount of times I've said to people, you know, your career is going to be a zigzag. I mean, there are very few people I know that have studied something, doing it for the rest of their life. Like, and also some of the jobs that you'll end up having don't exist yet.
Exactly. And surely, you know, surely it's about the skills you learn. It's about the interest. You know, if you're interested in something, then if you work hard at it, you can build up knowledge and expertise. So actually, you know, if you pick something you're interested in, it might take you somewhere completely different. I mean, it did for me. I did chemistry. I originally trained in ballet. So, and actually it turns out there's a surprising number of ballet turned scientists and engineers. It's actually quite common. So I did, you know, that was to my whole school career. And I did, I started arts A levels and then changed my mind in the, you know, that's a whole nother story. But, you know, I came very late to STEM. And I just think, you know, actually there's so many things that you can combine. You know, now I wish that maybe I'd looked a bit more at what things were, you know, for example, I could be, probably not now, I don't know, but I could be a technical manager in a theatre, for example. So that's like there are ways to combine something that you love with STEM and STEM skills, and I had no idea. I just thought they were separate things, you know, because they kind of were sold that way. It was like, well, you either go off and be sort of technical engineering, or you go off and do an arty thing, and that was just how it was. And I think it is changing. But yeah, it's, you know, mine's a great example of very zigzag, very squiggly. I'm sure it will continue to be very zigzag and squiggly, and that's okay. So yeah, just don't put pressure on people to make those decisions. You know, even the degree, you can change it. If you start something, people change it. They bolt things on, they you know, so it's, yeah, we've got to get away from that kind of making it, like you said, that big, massive life change, making it more than it really is.
Well, I think change needs to happen on a systemic level.
Yeah.
Because you and I'm actually blown away with like how similar our lives are, because I did ballet for 20 years alongside my
do a little duet.
And it's just like we pushed through it despite being unconventional. We pushed through it. But I would love to live in a world where younger generations are not having to push through anything. They can just organically find themselves, because I think you know, whichever generation you're in, whichever culture, country, wherever you're born and whatever you're born into, I think life is often just a journey of self-discovery.
Yes,
And it would just be
exactly.
nice if people didn't have the pressure of having to conform to someone else's ideal of what an individual's life journey should be.
Exactly. And I think seeing those pathways is helpful, but then knowing that your pathway can be different. You don't have to follow one of those pathways. You can make your own, you know, and it can be zigzag. I think if I guess if there's one thing that you could get across in a career talk, it would be that, you know, whatever career you're thinking about. So yeah, I completely agree.
Well, Sarah, you and I could talk probably for hours more, because I think we've got such aligned views on the importance of STEM, the need to encourage more diversity into STEM, and, you know, our backgrounds, and just, I don't know, there's a lot of synergy there. And it's been so nice to be able to like talk to someone that really understands and is passionate about this topic. We do it because we know how enriching STEM can be for others. For me, I do this because I want people to reach their fullest potentials. And so, you know, you're doing it too. That TED Talk completely blew me away. And that message, the messages in that TED Talk were just so fundamentally essential. So thank you for doing what you do to you know, raise awareness of this and change the landscape of STEM, and just keep going with it.
We just need more people doing the same, you know. Absolutely, is you know, sharing stories, whether that's through talks or, you know, books or TV or just people's networks. I think just sharing those stories, whether that's the stars or the streetlights, sharing those stories, I think that's really going to help. And like you say, we talked a lot about systemic change, things that need to happen, but I think that's something everybody can do, right? Literally everybody can help with that. So yeah, I'd love to see more people being a bit less scared of STEM and just really embracing their curiosity.
Yes, amen to that. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Sini.
Thanks for listening, and please do subscribe to this podcast and maybe even rate and review it if you can. The more ratings and reviews, then the more interest from those trusty algorithms, which could help to increase the reach of this show. And you can watch the video recording of this conversation on YouTube for my new series called eSTEAMD Women. It's all about self-discovery and self-evolution on innovation. So as always, be kind and loving to yourselves, and I wish you all a great week.